St. Augustine's Hospital was known for its medical excellence, but also for its rigid and competitive hierarchy. On that cold October morning, the building was abuzz. Cillian Murphy, the world-famous actor, had been admitted for complex brain surgery. His presence in the hospital was an event that mixed glamour and tension. Nurses whispered in the corridors, security guards blocked off restricted areas, and the most experienced doctors were already discussing who would lead the surgical team. Dr. Emily Carter watched from afar, sitting at her desk in the small office she shared with other residents. She was one of the few women on the senior surgical team, but that didn't mean respect. Her colleagues treated her like a shadow, someone who did her job without attracting attention, just as she preferred. That morning, however, her tranquility was interrupted when Dr. Harris, head of the department, knocked on her open office door. "Carter, you're going to lead Cillian Murphy's surgical team." The words came out dry, almost like a casual order. Emily looked up in surprise. "Me? But there are more experienced doctors in the department. There's also a scheduling problem," he replied, adjusting his glasses impatiently. "The others are busy with equally important cases. Besides, you have the necessary technical skills. Don't let me down." Emily swallowed. It was impossible not to notice the condescending tone in his voice. She knew this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test, a chance to prove her worth or be crushed by the weight of expectations. Since the beginning of her career, Emily had always been underestimated, especially by the older men who dominated the medical environment. Now, with a case as high profile as Cillian Murphy's, the scrutiny would be even greater. She spent the next few hours going over the patient's medical history. Cillian was 42 years old and suffered from severe chronic migraines, caused by a vascular anomaly in his brain. Surgery was risky, but necessary to avoid future complications. While studying the scans, Emily realized something peculiar. The records were incomplete. There were gaps in the previous notes, as if parts of the history had been omitted intentionally. She frowned, but decided to focus on the present. The patient's future depended on her. On the day of the operation, the room was full of modern equipment and flashing monitors. The team worked in silence, every movement precisely calculated. Emily felt the weight of all the stares on her, but she kept her posture firm. She began the procedure carefully, guiding her trained hands through the delicate brain structures. Everything seemed to be going well until, in a moment of distraction, she realized that she had touched an area adjacent to the target zone. Nobody noticed at the time, but Emily felt a tightness in her chest. She continued, trying to discreetly correct the mistake, but something inside her screamed that it wouldn't end well. When the surgery was finished, the team applauded quietly. Emily forced a smile, but her mind was in turmoil. She knew she had made a mistake, even if no one else had realized it. For the time being, the patient was stable, but the consequences could come at any moment. As the other doctors left the room, she stood still, staring at Cillian's heart monitor. He was beating regularly, but something about that regularity seemed wrong. Emily knew that her career was at stake. A mistake like that could destroy her reputation before she even had a chance to build it. But what really scared her was the unknown. What would happen if the mistake had irreversible consequences? What if Cillian woke up different? Or worse, what if he never woke up? Now, as she walked through the corridors of the hospital, Emily felt the weight of responsibility grow with every step. She needed to find out what had happened during that surgery, but she also knew that she couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Read on to find out how Emily faces criticism and proves her worth. The next day brought a deceptive calm to St. Augustine's Hospital. Emily stayed up all night, alternating between reviewing the surgery records and trying to rest for a few minutes on the sofa in her office. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment of the mistake replaying in her mind, the slight tremor in her hand, the unwanted contact with that adjacent brain area. She knew it hadn't been intentional, but that didn't diminish the guilt that consumed her. In the morning, she went to Cillian Murphy's room to check on him. The actor was still sedated, connected to monitors that displayed stable vital signs. His breathing was regular, and he seemed calm, as if he was just fast asleep. But something about that tranquility bothered Emily. It was as if his body was hiding something, a secret she was afraid to discover. While examining the charts and adjusting the medication, Emily noticed something strange in the results of the post-operative scans. There were small neurological anomalies that shouldn't have been there. The brain patterns showed irregular activity in areas that were not directly related to the surgery. She frowned, jotting down the observations in her notebook. This could just be a natural reflection of the surgical trauma, but something inside her told her there was more to it. In the corridor, after leaving Cillian's room, Emily found Dr. Harris talking to two men in dark suits. They seemed out of place in the hospital environment, their serious faces and rigid postures contrasting with the chaotic rhythm of the hospital. When Harris saw her, he beckoned her to come closer. "Dr. Carter, these are representatives of Cillian Murphy's private medical team. They'd like to discuss the patient's progress." The men shook her hand firmly, but without warmth. One of them, taller and with gray hair, spoke first. "Dr. Carter, we're concerned about Cillian's well-being. He's a very busy man, and any delay in his recovery could have significant implications." The words were polite, but carried a veiled threat. Emily kept her composure. "I completely understand. At the moment he's responding well to the surgery, but it's still too early to determine the full impact of the procedure. We need to monitor his progress over the next few hours." The second man, younger and wearing the sunglasses he insisted on wearing even inside the hospital, leaned in slightly. "We trust in your competence, doctor. We just expect everything to be conducted with absolute transparency." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Absolute transparency. She wasn't sure if they were just being cautious, or if they already suspected something. After the brief conversation, the men withdrew, leaving Emily alone with Harris. "Watch out for these guys," he muttered, lowering his voice. "They have powerful connections. Any trouble here, and you'll be the first to pay." Emily nodded, but her hands were shaking as she walked back to her office. She needed to better understand what was going on. During the afternoon, she delved into Cillian's medical files, looking for clues about the anomalies she had observed. It was then that she found something disturbing: documents that mentioned experimental clinical trials. There weren't many details, just vague references to treatments carried out in private institutions before Cillian was transferred to St. Augustine's. Intrigued, Emily decided to investigate further. She rang a colleague who worked in another unit of the hospital, someone with access to more extensive databases. After a few discreet questions, he confirmed that Cillian had taken part in highly secretive pharmaceutical tests. "I don't know much," he said hesitantly, "but it looks like he was involved in something big. A lot of money at stake." The information made Emily even more uneasy. She began to connect the dots. The incomplete records, the men in suits, the experimental tests. Everything indicated that there was something much bigger behind the case. And now, with the mistake she had made during the surgery, she feared that the consequences would be even more serious than she had imagined. That evening, while walking through the empty corridors of the hospital, Emily met a nurse called Clara, who worked the night shift. Clara was known for her loyalty to her patients and her willingness to question the hospital's rules when necessary. Emily decided to trust her, at least partially. "Clara, I need a favor," she said, lowering her voice. "Can you help me monitor Cillian more closely? Something isn't right with him, and I need to understand what's going on before it's too late." Clara frowned but nodded. "Of course, doctor. But what's worrying you?" Emily hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think there's something in his history that hasn't been revealed, and the mistake I made during the surgery may have triggered something we don't yet understand." Clara agreed to help, and together they began to observe Cillian more closely. The next morning, he finally woke up. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the soft light of the room. Emily was beside him, ready to assess him. "Good morning, Mr. Murphy," she said, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling?" Cillian looked at her, confused. Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, but there was something else in his expression. He looked genuinely lost, as if he didn't recognize anyone around him. Emily felt her heart sink. Read on to discover the devastating consequences of this mistake. Subscribe to follow the next chapters and see how Emily copes with this increasingly complex situation. Cillian Murphy's confusion when he woke up was only the beginning. Emily tried to remain calm as she assessed his condition, but something was clearly wrong. Not only did he seem disorientated, but he also exhibited memory lapses that went beyond what was expected after brain surgery. When she asked his name, he hesitated for a moment before replying, I'm an actor, right?" The sentence came out as a question, as if he himself was uncertain of his identity. Emily exchanged a worried glance with Clara, who was standing next to her. "Mr. Murphy, you're in St. Augustine's Hospital. You've undergone surgery to correct a neurological condition. Can you remember anything before that?" Cillian frowned, visibly struggling. "I remember flashes. People talking to me, doctors. But the faces are blurred. And there's something else. Like I've done something important recently, but I can't remember what." Her voice was tense, full of frustration. Emily noted down her observations in silence, trying not to show how much it frightened her. Memory lapses were possible after brain surgery, but the extent and nature of Cillian's symptoms seemed unusual. She asked him to perform a few simple tasks, recognizing objects, repeating sentences, following basic instructions. He managed to complete most of them, but there were times when he seemed completely lost, as if his mind was being pulled in different directions. Over the next few days, Cillian's symptoms began to evolve in an even more disturbing way. He reported vivid dreams that seemed to blend in with his real memories. One morning he called Emily into his room, agitated. "Doctor, I dreamt about you," he said, with a strange expression on his face. "But it wasn't just a dream. I saw things, details about you, your office, your notes. How is that possible?" Emily felt a chill. She had never mentioned these details to him, and certainly no one else would have done so. "Mr. Murphy, these dreams could be the result of the surgery. Your brain is processing information in unusual ways. It's important that you remain calm." But Cillian didn't seem convinced. "They're not just dreams," he insisted. "It's as if I'm accessing something I shouldn't know about." Meanwhile, other patients in the hospital began to report strange incidents. An elderly woman in the psychiatric ward claimed to have seen Cillian in her dreams, even though they had never met. A young man hospitalized for trauma treatment said he woke up with vivid memories of conversations he swore he had with Cillian, even though he was sedated throughout. The stories were fragmented, but they all pointed to something unusual happening. Emily knew she needed to investigate further. She began to review the records of the experimental tests mentioned earlier, looking for any information that could explain Cillian's behavior. It was then that she found something alarming. The tests involved drugs designed to improve brain plasticity, but there were warnings about potentially devastating side effects. Some of the notes mentioned changes in memory and even cognitive abilities amplified in unpredictable ways. With this new information, Emily decided to confront the representatives of Cillian's private medical team. She met them again in the corridor, this time with Clara by her side as moral support. "I need answers," she said bluntly. "The experimental tests that Cillian took part in, what exactly did they involve? And why wasn't this publicized before the surgery?" The older man, who seemed to be the leader of the group, exchanged a tense glance with his companion before answering. "This information is confidential, doctor. We can't discuss it with you." "Confidential?" Emily felt her patience wearing thin. "You know he's showing severe symptoms, don't you? This could be related to the tests. I need to understand what we're dealing with here." The younger man intervened, his voice low and threatening. "Dr. Carter, I suggest you concentrate on doing your job and leave the bigger issues to us. We don't want any unnecessary complications." Emily knew she wouldn't get any more information out of them, but the conversation only reinforced her suspicions. There was something much bigger going on, something that went beyond the limits of conventional medicine. She returned to Cillian's room, determined to find answers. Over the next few days, Emily realized that Cillian's memory lapses were intensifying. He began quoting intimate details about other people in the hospital, nurses, doctors, even patients, as if he had access to their personal lives. In a particularly distressing moment, he mentioned something about Clara's recent divorce, something Emily knew she had never discussed openly with anyone. "How do you know about that?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Cillian shook his head, confused. "I don't know. I just know." Emily felt she was on the verge of something monumental, something that could change everything she understood about the case. But she also knew that she was walking on dangerous ground. The men in suits continued to prowl the hospital, and she could feel their eyes on her whenever she entered or left Cillian's room. Keep watching to uncover the dark secrets hidden in Cillian's past. Follow the story to find out how Emily will face this new threat while trying to protect her patient and her own reputation. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and paranoia for Emily. She knew she was in a race against time, The pharmaceutical corporation behind the experimental tests was getting impatient, and men in dark suits seemed to be everywhere. In the corridors, in the meeting rooms, even in the hospital car park. They watched her like predators on the prowl, waiting for the right moment to strike. Emily tried to keep up appearances, but her mind was constantly occupied with strategies to protect Cillian and expose the truth. She knew she couldn't trust anyone at the hospital, except Clara. The nurse had become her closest ally, helping her gather evidence and monitor the corporation's movements. Together, they began to notice worrying patterns. Employees being questioned about their interactions with Emily, medical files being audited without authorization, and even security cameras being installed in areas where they hadn't existed before. One day, while Emily was discreetly reviewing Cillian's medical records in her office, she received an anonymous message on her mobile phone. It was an unknown number, and the message contained just one sentence: "Be careful who's next to you." The warning was enough to make her even more alert. Who could be betraying her trust, and why? The answer came sooner than she expected. That same afternoon, during a quick coffee break at the hospital, Emily met Dr. Liam Harper, a fellow surgeon who had always been cordial, albeit distant. He approached her with a friendly smile, but something in his eyes made her suspicious. "Emily," he began in a soft voice, "how are things with the Murphy case? I hear it's been complicated." She forced a polite smile. "Everything's under control, Liam. Why? Is there anything specific you want to know?" He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I just wanted to offer my help if you need it. These high-profile cases can be oppressive." Emily nodded but felt a tightness in her chest. The offer seemed genuine, but something in the way he spoke sounded rehearsed. She decided to test him. "Actually, I've been facing some ethical issues with the representatives of Cillian's private medical team. They seem to be more interested in covering up certain details than in ensuring the patient's well-being." Liam frowned, but his expression quickly softened. "I see. Well, if you need any advice or support, I'm here." After the conversation, Emily returned to her office with an uncomfortable feeling. Something about Liam didn't seem right. Later, when she checked the records of access to medical files, she discovered that he had recently consulted Cillian's medical records, something that was not part of his direct responsibilities. It was then that Emily realized Liam was working for the corporation. He was the person who had been handing over information about her movements and discoveries. The betrayal hit her like a punch in the gut. She had always known that she couldn't fully trust her colleagues, but she had never imagined that someone so close to her could act against her. With this new information, Emily decided to take extreme precautions. She transferred all the evidence she had gathered onto an encrypted USB stick and stored it in a safe place outside the hospital. She also warned Clara about her suspicions, asking her to redouble her vigilance. The next day, the men in dark suits turned up again, this time demanding an immediate meeting with Emily. She was summoned to the hospital conference room, where she found not only the two usual representatives, but also Liam, who was sitting next to them with a neutral expression. The older man began to speak, his voice calm but laden with authority. "Dr. Carter, we are concerned about your recent behavior. We've received reports that you've been investigating aspects of the Murphy case that don't fall within your remit. This needs to stop immediately." Emily kept her composure, but felt her pulse quicken. "My only concern is the patient's well-being. If there's anything in his medical history that could affect his recovery, it's my duty to investigate." The younger man leaned forward, his tone now harsher. "You need to understand, doctor, that this case goes beyond a simple patient. We're dealing with experimental technology that has global implications. Any outside interference could jeopardize decades of research." Emily knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she couldn't back down. If this technology is so important, why was it tested on a human being without full informed consent? And why are the side effects being ignored? The silence that followed was heavy. Liam finally spoke, his voice firm but emotionless. "Dr. Carter, I suggest you carefully consider your next actions. Your career and reputation are at stake." Emily sensed the implied threat, but also realized that they were nervous. They knew she had valuable information, and that gave her some leverage. After the meeting, she returned to Cillian's room, determined to confront him directly. "Mr. Murphy," she said, closing the door behind her, "we need to talk. You're in danger, and so am I." The corporation that carried out the experimental test is trying to cover it up. We need to act fast." Cillian looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. "What do you suggest?" Emily took a deep breath. "We need to expose the truth, but to do that I'm going to need your help. Are you willing to risk everything to do that?" Cillian hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Yes, I don't want to be used as a guinea pig. Let's do it." Keep following to see how Emily will face this new threat. Follow the story to discover how she will use her courage and intelligence to protect herself and her patients while fighting a powerful force. Emily knew that time was running out. After the tense meeting with the corporate representatives and the confirmation that Liam was a traitor, she realized that she had to act quickly. Cillian Murphy had agreed to help her, but they were both aware of the risks involved. Exposing the truth about the experimental tests meant going up against one of the largest pharmaceutical corporations in the world, an entity with virtually unlimited resources and little tolerance for dissent. That evening, Emily and Clara met in a small cafe outside the hospital, away from prying eyes. Clara had brought with her some additional documents that she had managed to access discreetly, including obscure financial records linking the corporation to various medical institutions around the world. The connections were clear. The company was not only carrying out experimental tests on human beings, but also profiting from them by selling neural technology to governments and military organizations. "This is bigger than we imagined," said Clara, her voice low but charged with urgency. "They won't stop until they make sure no one knows the truth." Emily nodded, her thoughts racing. "We need to find something concrete, something we can use against them, something they can't cover up." Clara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There are rumors that they keep physical files in a secret warehouse outside the city. If we can access those files, we might find the evidence we need." Emily frowned. "A secret warehouse? How do you know that?" "Overheard conversations," Clara replied, avoiding details. "But it won't be easy to get in. They have heavy security." Emily felt the weight of the situation, but knew there was no other option. "Then we'll do it. But we need to be careful. One wrong move and we're finished." Over the next few days, Emily began to meticulously plan her raid on the warehouse. She used her access to the hospital system to create a false identity as a temporary employee of the corporation, while Clara prepared an escape plan in case something went wrong. Cillian, still fragile, insisted on helping, even though her involuntary abilities to access memories were unpredictable. "I could try accessing the security guard's memories," he suggested during a private conversation. "Maybe I can find out something useful." Emily hesitated, worried about the risks to Cillian's mental health. "Are you sure you can control this? I don't want you to hurt yourself." Cillian shook his head, determined. "I don't have total control, but I know I can help. We need to try." On the day scheduled for the operation, Emily and Clara drove to the warehouse site, a discreet building in an industrial area far from the city. The place seemed abandoned at first glance, but security cameras and armed guards indicated otherwise. Using her false identity, Emily managed to get in under the pretense of carrying out an internal audit. Clara remained outside, ready to intervene in the event of an emergency. Inside the warehouse, Emily found rows and rows of sealed boxes, each labeled with encrypted codes. She knew she wouldn't have much time. As she rummaged through the files, Cillian, via a silent phone call, began to access the memories of nearby security guards. His voice sounded weak and distant, but he managed to provide crucial information. "There's a specific file marked Project Mnemosine," said Cillian, his breathing uneven. "The guards mentioned something about emergency protocols. They're monitoring everything." Emily found the file mentioned and quickly transferred its contents to the encrypted USB stick she carried with her. However, before she could leave, an alarm went off. Apparently, someone had noticed her unauthorized presence. Running through the corridors, Emily felt her heart hammering in her chest. Guards appeared in front of her, blocking the exit. She knew she couldn't fight them, so she decided to use the only weapon she had, her wits. With forced calm, she raised her hands. "I'm a doctor from St. Augustine's Hospital," she said, her voice firm. "I've been sent here to investigate possible irregularities in the experimental tests. If you detain me, it will be considered obstruction of an official medical investigation." The guards hesitated, clearly torn between following orders and avoiding a bigger scandal. Taking advantage of the gap, Emily pushed past them and ran towards the exit, where Clara was waiting for her with her car running. Back at the hospital, Emily and Clara began to analyze the contents of the file. What they found was shocking. Videos of tests carried out on patients without informed consent, detailed reports on the devastating side effects of experimental drugs, and even recordings of secret meetings where executives discussed the military use of neural technology. "That's enough to destroy this corporation," murmured Clara in disbelief. Emily nodded, but knew there was still a long way to go. "Yes, but we need to publicize this strategically. If we just hand it over to the press, they could silence everything before it reaches the public." That's when Emily had an idea. She arranged a press conference at the hospital, claiming that she would be making an important announcement about Cillian Murphy's state of health. When the journalists and cameras were present, she revealed everything: the experimental tests, the side effects, the corporate manipulation. The images and documents she had obtained were shown on a big screen, leaving everyone in the room stunned. The repercussions were immediate. The corporation tried to discredit her, but the evidence was irrefutable. The case gained global attention, raising ethical debates about scientific advances and human rights. Discover the explosive secrets that will change everything. Follow the story to see how Emily will face the consequences of her actions and fight to protect the future of Cillian and other patients affected by corporate greed. Subscribe to the channel. The repercussions of the press conference were like an atomic bomb in the medical and corporate world. Emily knew that she had crossed an irreversible line by exposing the secrets of the pharmaceutical corporation, but she also knew that there was no other way to protect Cillian and other patients who had been used as guinea pigs. However, the initial victory brought with it a new wave of attacks. The corporation was not going to surrender so easily. Soon after the evidence was released, the hospital was raided by lawyers and legal representatives sent by the company. They demanded full access to Cillian's medical records and tried to disqualify Emily as a doctor, alleging negligence and breach of confidentiality. Dr. Harris, always concerned about the hospital's image, summoned Emily to an emergency meeting. "Dr. Carter," he began, his voice tense, "you have put this hospital at risk with your actions. We're facing lawsuits and threats of financial retaliation. You need to understand the consequences of this." Emily stood her ground, even though she felt the weight of his words. "The consequences? The consequences are the lives that have been ruined because of this experimental technology. If I had kept quiet, we would have had more victims. This is bigger than the hospital or my career." Harris sighed, visibly frustrated. "You did what you thought was right, but now we have to deal with the consequences. The corporation is pressing for you to be removed immediately." Meanwhile, Clara was working behind the scenes to ensure that Emily had support. She organized a group of nurses and doctors who shared her ethical concerns, forming a solidarity network within the hospital. Together, they began to document similar cases of patients who had taken part in experimental tests without full informed consent. These additional reports further strengthened Emily's position. But the corporation was not willing to accept defeat. That same night, armed men stormed the hospital, trying to access Cillian's medical files and recover any remaining evidence. Emily and Clara were prepared. Using an improvised security system that Clara had installed, they managed to block the intruders' access and alert the police. In the chaos that followed, Emily directly confronted one of the leaders of the operation, the older man who had previously appeared at the meetings. He was furious, his eyes shining with a mixture of anger and despair. "You don't know what you've done," he snarled, pointing a finger at her. "This technology could save millions of lives. Now you've destroyed it." Emily glared at him sternly. "Save lives? You were using human beings as guinea pigs without consent. That's not saving lives. It's manipulation and exploitation. I won't let you continue." The confrontation ended with the arrival of the police, who arrested the intruders. But Emily knew that this was only the beginning. The corporation had enough resources to prolong the legal battle for years, and she would need more than evidence to ensure that the truth prevailed. Over the next few days, Cillian decided to take action. With his health still fragile, he used his influence as a public figure to amplify Emily's message. In an emotional interview broadcast globally, he spoke about his experience as a guinea pig and denounced the corporation's unethical practices. His sincerity and vulnerability touched millions of people, generating a movement in support of transparency in medical research. "I'm not just a victim," said Cillian, his voice firm, but charged with emotion. "I'm an example of what happens when we allow corporate interest to trump ethics. We need to fight so that this never happens again." The interview had a profound impact. The public began pressurizing governments and regulatory agencies to investigate, not just the corporation involved, but the entire pharmaceutical industry. Protests erupted in various parts of the world, demanding greater transparency and accountability. Even so, Emily's personal struggle was far from over. The corporation filed a series of lawsuits against her, alleging defamation and financial damages. She was forced to attend grueling hearings, where she faced ruthless lawyers determined to destroy her reputation. But each time she went to court, Emily used her wits and the evidence she had gathered to fight back. During one of the most critical hearings, Emily gave a moving testimony. She spoke about the mistakes she had made during Cillian's surgery and how it had led her to discover the truth. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice firm but full of sincerity. "But that mistake showed me something much bigger, a network of corruption and exploitation that puts profits before lives. I won't apologize for exposing it." Her speech resonated deeply, both in court and in the media. Supporters packed the hearing galleries, holding placards with messages of solidarity. Even some medical colleagues who had previously underestimated her began to recognize her courage and determination. In the end, justice prevailed. The corporation was forced to suspend all experimental tests and pay substantial compensation to the victims. Although the legal proceedings continued for months, public exposure ensured that the truth was not silenced. Cillian, now recovered, decided to leave the hospital. He hugged Emily before leaving, thanking her for everything she had done. "You saved more than my life," he said, with a sincere smile. "You gave me back my humanity." Emily watched as he left, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. She knew there was still a lot of work to be done, but she also knew that she had taken the first step towards real change. Keep following to see how Emily ends her heroic journey. Subscribe to the channel, where all the pieces fall into place and Emily reflects on the impact of her choices. St. Augustine's Hospital was never the same after the events that exposed the pharmaceutical corporation and its unethical experimental tests. Cillian Murphy's case became a global landmark, discussed at medical conferences, in classrooms, and even in the cinema. But for Emily Carter, the journey didn't end with applause or public recognition. She knew that the real change would happen behind the scenes, in the daily decisions that shaped the future of medicine. In the months following the exhibition, Emily founded an independent organization dedicated to investigating unethical practices in medical research. Named PWAT, Ethica Medica, the initiative quickly gained support from doctors, scientists, and activists around the world. The mission was clear: to guarantee transparency, protect patients' rights, and press for stricter regulations in the pharmaceutical industry. Clara, her faithful ally throughout the crisis, became one of Ethica Medica's main collaborators. Together, they began mapping cases similar to Cillian's, connecting victims, and gathering evidence for legal cases against other companies involved in questionable practices. It was hard work, but Emily felt she was finally doing something meaningful, something that went beyond saving individual lives. However, the personal consequences of the case still echoed in her life. Although her name was celebrated by many, she also faced retaliation. Some colleagues accused her of being too radical or dangerous for the traditional medical system. Others, like Dr. Harris, simply ignored her, treating her like a pariah within the hospital. Despite this, Emily was undeterred. She knew that real change always came with resistance. One morning, while reviewing files in her small office at Ethica Medica's headquarters, Emily received an unexpected visitor. It was Cillian Murphy. He had faded from the limelight after his departure from the hospital, but now he reappeared with a quiet smile and an expression of genuine gratitude. "Dr. Carter," he said, holding out his hand, "I needed to come and thank you in person. You've done more for me than any surgery could have done." Emily shook his hand in surprise. "I only did what any doctor should do, Mr. Murphy. Protect my patient." Cillian shook his head. "No, you went beyond that. You gave me back my voice, and now I want to use that voice to help you." He explained that he had decided to use his influence to promote the causes defended by Ethica Medica. He offered to fund part of the organization's operations and help amplify its global campaigns. For Emily, this was an unexpected gift, an opportunity to expand the reach of her work in ways she had never imagined. Over the next few months, Ethica Medica grew exponentially. With Cillian's support, they launched a series of investigative documentaries about unethical practices in the medical industry, as well as an online database where patients could report negative experiences with experimental tests. The platform quickly became a powerful tool for exposing abuses and pressing for change. But the most profound impact was personal. Emily realized that throughout her journey, she herself had changed. The underestimated doctor who once sought only to prove her worth was now a tireless leader in the fight for medical justice. She had learned that human fallibility was not something to be hidden or feared, but a driving force for growth and transformation. One quiet afternoon, while observing the movement at Ethica Medica's headquarters, Emily sat down at her desk and wrote a short text to herself. It was a reflection on everything that had happened. When I started my career, I thought that being a doctor meant never making mistakes, that every decision had to be perfect, every procedure flawless. But I've learned that our mistakes can be just as important as our successes, as long as we're willing to learn from them. The mistake I made during Cillian's surgery was devastating, but it was also the catalyst for something bigger. It taught me that real medicine is not about perfection, but about humanity, about courage, about doing what's right, even when everyone around you says you're wrong. Emily put the text away in a drawer, promising to revisit it whenever she needed reminding of its purpose. She knew there was still a lot of work to be done, but she also knew she was on the right track. Months later, at a ceremony organized by an international medical association, Emily was honored with an award for her contribution to medical ethics. During her acceptance speech, she spoke directly to the audience, challenging them to rethink their priorities. "Medicine cannot be guided only by profits or prestige," she said, her voice firm and inspiring. "It needs to be guided by the heart, by our responsibility to protect those who trust us. If we can do that, then we really are saving lives." Applause echoed around the room, but Emily barely noticed it. Her thoughts were turned to the future, to the next battles, the next victories, and the next lives that could be transformed. What would you do if you were in Emily's shoes? How can we prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Leave your opinion in the comments and share this story with other people.